Good evening, everybody. Aaron, how are you, my friend?
Hey, Jeff, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on again. How are you?
I am good, man. I'm good.
Good.
Um, I'm good. Yeah, you know what? I'm very shiny. I was telling we were backstage, everyone. Welcome to School Sojourn, by the way, everyone. But we were backstage talking, Aaron and Bill, who thank God is doing much better this week, and all the prayers and good thoughts and good vibes and whatever it is that you do and put out there are appreciated on that. We were talking backstage though. Once the camera came on, I was like, "Holy crap! I look like a greased pig. I'm not sweaty. I just got done doing some Korean skincare, and my wife got me into it about 6 months ago, and so now I have a. And I admit I'm not the most masculine specimen out there, or maybe I am because I own it. Anyways, I don't know, but that's why I'm so shiny. And I was like, man, I hope the sheen wears off at some point. But we'll just say it's the glory of God. I'm being transfigured before you all. And but no, it's not. It's a caffeinated face mask. The residue of that, anyways. But welcome to School Sojourn tonight, everyone. We are without Andrea tonight. She is actually in my state, in Michigan, at the oh gosh, what's the event? It's like the biggest Paracon, one of the biggest Paracons in the nation, and
Wow.
the I can't remember the name of it, but it's on Mackinac Island, basically. So she's there tonight
Nice.
and having a good time, no doubt. But we are honored and privileged to have our good friend Aaron Tomlinson with us tonight. Aaron, this is probably your fifth or sixth time being on with us now,
Yeah.
and this is just a great excuse to have a conversation with you because we both lead busy lives.
Yeah.
So actually, just having a conversation one-on-one is rather difficult, probably for both
Right.
of us.
Right.
So this is great, and everybody else just kind of gets to watch as you and I just talk about stuff we find fascinating and interesting. So
Yeah.
I'm really honored that you made the time to be with us tonight. It's always last minute when I realize I have an opening, and I always appreciate you just coming on. And I got to be honest with you, in the name of full disclosure, no pun intended for our UFO aficionados out there, but in the name of full disclosure, boy, I had a quantifiably just bad day today.
Oh man.
So I'm so excited. This hour is always therapeutic. Like
Yeah.
even
Right.
when it's Andrea and I, it's always just so therapeutic. And I know you do a lot of live streams as well. And there's just
Mm-hmm.
something so great about meeting with a like mind. And even though we don't necessarily always see the comments from those viewing, we know you're here with us, and we know that you're interacting, and it's such a joy and an honor, and it refreshes me every Friday evening. And tonight I especially need it, and so I'm really looking forward to this
Awesome.
conversation. So, Aaron, we kind of bounce. Oh, class is in session, by the way, guys. That's usually Andrea's thing to say, but I'll say class is in session.
Yes.
Um, so we had kind of bounced a couple ideas off of each other just real quickly, and I had
Mhm.
some thoughts, and in keeping with Andrea and I's tradition of really not planning too much, we send each other like a paragraph long text, and we're like, that sounds good, let's go with it, and then we just go with it because that's just kind of the sorts of people we are. But I sent you some thoughts that I had, and then you
Mm-hmm.
sent me back some thoughts that you were having, and I
Mm-hmm.
actually kind of see how both of these can collide and coalesce, and I think they will as we have the conversation. But you've been doing a series on Sunday mornings. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if it's necessarily a series, but there's been a very I catch you. It's usually like I'm sleepy on Sunday morning, so I'm usually like in the shower, and I'm watching a video, and that's usually when you pop up, and I'm like, oh, Aaron's on, and I usually catch it right about in the middle. But you've been talking about not necessarily, I don't want to say science versus spirituality, but you've been
Right.
talking a lot about the Western science, let's say obsessed mindset almost,
Mhm.
and some of the eschewing of spirituality that goes on. And honestly, it's even and this is coming from an individual who, as a result of his deconstructive experience, became an atheist.
Right.
um, so I understand that experience, and I've been there, and I became a very logic based, logic obsessed person. Everything was about logic and reason and rationality for me. And I
Mm-hmm.
had 1,000 Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens quotes in my pockets at all times to answer
Yeah.
detractors. And I'm reading Daniel Dennett in one hand and Sam Harris in the other. I mean, I was very much a part of that world and understand it. But that was really kind of like at least at this point of my life, I kind of look back at that as sort of being like the adolescent stage of my own spiritual development.
Sure. Yeah.
Not that I'm saying I'm in anything approximating adulthood now, but it was more of a it was more about leaving behind an old system and really like getting it purged out of me so
Right.
that I could be reintroduced to spirituality, sort of with all of those demons, if you will, exorcised from me, so I could almost start fresh.
Mhm.
So you've been making a lot of really great and really fascinating points on Sundays from what I've been able to see midway through whilst showering. They have been great. And I do want to encourage everyone to check out Aaron's YouTube channel. It's conscious
spirituality.
spirituality. Yes.
Yeah.
So
And
check it
then-
out and watch on Sunday mornings. He does lives every Sunday, and he does some incredible teaching. So Aaron, if you will, my man, just maybe kind of introduce us to what you've been talking about.
Mhm.
Take us somewhere, and then we'll just talk, and we'll see where the conversation goes. And I trust it's going to go in some amazing places.
Yeah. So, and I've talked about this before on the show. We've talked about it, but when you deconstruct, like your whole world gets turned upside down, especially when you're as committed as we were, right? And so you're looking for, okay, what's the path forward? And I realized, I bought into a lot of stuff in my past that turned out not to hold up against critical thinking. Let's just put it that way, or however you want to put it, right? And I was watching so many of my peers and friends and people I was working with that were going through the same process, and they would immediately jump into, and this isn't a criticism, it's human nature thing that we do. It's just something that I wanted to be self-aware about, but they would immediately jump into a new path, right? A newfound path, almost like a new convert to Christianity. Like, this is it.
Right.
And whether that was, some form of new age spirituality, or whether it was atheism, right? Like you said, like carrying Richard Dawkins quotes in your
the God delusion became my KJV,
Yes, exactly. And I recognized in myself that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to, I wanted to apply some critical thinking. And I had some really good friends that were atheists that were challenging my more open worldview with spirituality and stuff like that. And I wanted to take their considerations seriously.
Yeah.
And so I just, I began to think about it. I began to do some research. There's, I think, for me, a guy out there named Bernardo Kastrup, who has a PhD in computer science, CIS, and a PhD in philosophy, started talking about, I ran across him, and he was talking about this problem with scientific materialism. And that was a really good place for me to land. Because and I saw how oftentimes atheism and scientific materialism, while they don't have to marry or run together, they oftentimes do. And I mean, it's one thing to realize, okay, in Christianity and in most religions, we anthropomorphize God. We put human traits and characteristics on God. Some playwright, I can't remember his name, but he said, God made man in his own image, and man returned the favor.
Yeah, you're right.
And we see that in the Bible. But so, an atheism that moves away from that is one thing, but an atheism, for me anyway, that moves away into matter is all there is. All there is matter and energy and magnetic fields and things like this. And everything in the universe, everything in existence, everything in reality is observable, quantifiable, and repeatable. And we just need to apply the principles of scientific materialism, and eventually we'll get to all the answers about life and about the nature of the universe and stuff like that. That just never sat well with me at all. And so one of the things that I learned from Bernardo Kastrup's work is that scientific materialism is based on a presupposition, and that presupposition is that matter, for lack of a better term, it's not very well nuanced, but matter is all that exists. In other words, everything that exists out there in some measurable capacity. And then we as human beings in our human experience is the byproduct of a random assembly of matter that doesn't even have any intelligent pattern to it. It's just random in a giant, maybe infinite universe, right? And so then we just show up here. And the that's the presupposition. That's all there is that's out there. So then neuroscientists talk about what's called the hard problem of consciousness. And the hard problem of consciousness is that everything about our conscious experience is qualitative, not necessarily quantitative. So, for example, the color red, that's a quality. Your shiny face, that's a quality. The taste of coffee or red wine, or falling in love or having regret. These are all qualities of our experience. And it's those things are automatically excluded when you say that everything is quantifiable.
Yeah.
Because those things are not quantifiable. And so how then do we explain consciousness? And two reasons I think that atheism is attractive and popular in our culture is, number one, it does away with the fear of death and the fear of judgment, right?
Yeah.
So if all that exists is this biological material that randomly assembled and my consciousness is the byproduct of that, then that relieves me from the fear of judgment and the fear of death. Because if my consciousness goes out, I'll never even know I existed, and no problem in that sense, right? So that's the first thing.
And in that way, it functions very much like Christianity.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing, and then I'll kick it back to you, Jeff, and get your thoughts on it. But the second thing that is attractive about it is that we live and engage in this physical environment, and we have a general consensus that is very easy amongst all of us. So, for example, you're wearing a black shirt, right? Unless someone's colorblind or something, or they can't see you, we can all have a consensus that is that. This table is hard. And so it seems self-evident. But here's the problem. Here's where the problem of consciousness comes in. Consciousness is even more self-evident than the world out there. Because everything that we experience because we're self-reflective beings, because we have the ability to be of metacognition, meaning the ability to self-reflect, the ability to think about our thinking, the ability to know that we're aware and what we're experiencing and the qualities of our experience and stuff like that. So, for example, we spend roughly, if you're lucky, not like me, because I struggle with insomnia sometimes, but roughly 1/3 of our life asleep, right? And so we'll have a dream, and our dream will take on all of the qualities of material experience, but yet there's nothing about the dream that can be measured by science, that can be observed by someone else. I live behind what Bernardo Kastrup calls a dissociative boundary that no one else can cross, right? So while they can measure the dream activity in my brain as a correlation to dreaming, unless I'm testified to what was actually dreamed, no one else can observe or think about or talk about that experience. So what began to dawn on me is that consciousness is the most basic thing that we can have consensus upon. It's where we can begin. And then if consciousness is the base material of reality, then we can explain matter. But if matter is the base material, the foundation of reality, we can't explain consciousness. And so that's where I've kind of been the last few weeks in my podcast.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant stuff, man. And, the hard problem of consciousness, even the problem of solipsism, how do you know you're not just a brain in a vat or something like that? Or, it's like, well, there's a lot I want to say. Well, two things. One, I want to the idea that you put forth about atheism being that it expiates the fear of death, right? So when you said that the attractiveness of that belief system, in my mind, the attractiveness of it to me was that it instantly gave me all of the comforts that religion gave me, except that I didn't have to be religious anymore, and I didn't have to look like I was some Bronze Age barbarian who was just trying to make excuses for my God who delighted in blood sacrifices, and now he was fed the ultimate sacrificial snack in Jesus, and so he doesn't want blood anymore, and because those are the kind of things you always felt like you were covering up for God's like shady past, and you never really felt like you could be a respectable part of any conversation with any sort of intellectual people because you've got this belief system. So atheism was like, because I was embarrassed of my Christianity, to be quite frank, sometimes when I was in the presence of certain people. And so, but atheism allowed me to still have many of the certainties that I had as a Christian, which is that I'm saved from hell. There is no judgment to face afterwards because, well, there's nothing, and I found that very comforting. It was Epictetus who said that, when you're here, death is not. When death is here, you're not. And that was a very comforting thought, and that may very well be the case. I don't know, but it was still comforting. I knew there was nothing more to face, and Christianity gave me the assurance that, well, I'm not going to face that because I'm right with God. And atheism was like, well, I don't have to have the problematic beliefs that my previous brand of Christianity demanded I have in order to be a part of the club.
Right.
But I still had all of the assurances that it afforded me, that basically I was okay with God because there was no God, and it still, it all panned out the same way. I don't have to be afraid. When I was a Christian and I was afraid demons were going to attack me in the middle of the night, I could just say the blood of Jesus and, and do that thing. But now I just didn't believe in them. So it still was the same. Right. It functioned very similarly.
Yep.
So it was attractive for that reason. But then there are moments where there are moments where you're touched by, or you touch the transcendent.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I came to the point where I realized that whatever these moments are, even if they are all just being generated by my mind, it doesn't really matter, because there are something about these moments that make this matter. Right. There's those moments make whatever this material is, even if I think that's all that there is, there's something that makes this matter actually matter and have meaning. And once you have those experiences, and I had them growing up, I had them as a young man who experienced haunting phenomenon that I thought I could write off because I listened to all the debunkers, the James Randys, the Darren Browns, guys whose work I still appreciate. And all of them, I was like, oh, I can explain all of these things that happened in this house I grew up in and lived in for 13 years now. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was just seeking assurance that such things didn't happen.
Right.
But when I opened myself up to reality, I couldn't deny the fact that I had touched and been touched by something beyond me, beyond the meat that I believed was all that there was, and the dust from which it sprang, and the chaotic universe that wove it together on accident. Once you touch those things, you can't be untouched by them. Once they touch you, they don't go anywhere. They stick with you. And anyways, why don't you share some of your thoughts, man? I don't know.
So again, atheism that's based on scientific materialism is built on a presupposition, and a presupposition is something that we suppose to be true ahead of time, even though we don't have evidence for it.
Right.
So in that sense, it also shares that with religion.
Yeah.
Because our presupposition was there's a God in the sky who gave us a book, right, and told us how to live. Right. And
what I think was it Terence McKenna who always used to say that scientific materialism just says, give me one free miracle and I'll explain the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting, now that we can do brain scans and stuff like this, what they've discovered is that, there are a number of phenomena that share common characteristics. And I'll try to give you three of them, at least. So one would be a near-death experience. Someone is clinically dead and they come back, and they usually testify to not just an experience, but a very vivid, very alive, very enriched experience. There were colors there that I haven't seen on Earth, and there was beauty there, and they're touched, and there's usually a spiritual component to it that changes their life. So that's one. The second one would be, ironically, auto asphyxiation. This is something that young kids get into or whatever, where there's choking. Oftentimes there's sex involved, but the idea is to bring a person to the point of passing out. Well, when they're at the point of passing out, the blood is drained from their brain, and so their brain activity shuts down. And the reason it's attractive to them is it gives them out of body experiences. It gives them almost like an LSD or a mushroom type experience where they're recounting the same things that people talk about in near-death experiences.
Right,
This
right.
enriched thing. And then the third one would be they've done brain scans on people who've taken psilocybin and gone on trips. And the expectation was, the hypothesis was that the brain would light up like a Christmas tree because you're having such an enriched experience. But what they discovered is that brain activity, instead of lighting up, it's significantly reduced. So the problem with scientific materialism, even though there are neuroscientists that will scoff at the idea of the hard problem of consciousness, and they'll say, of course, the qualities of your experience is the byproduct of this goo that's in your skull. But the problem is, it's completely counterintuitive then, that when someone dies and there is no brain activity, they come back and recount this experience. When someone is asphyxiated and the blood drains from their brain and their brain activity shuts down, they have this experience. And when someone's on psilocybin, their brain activity, instead of lighting up like a Christmas tree, is greatly reduced. And so you can't explain that with materialism. You can't say then that my experiences that I've had of the transcendent that you were talking about is the byproduct of, oh, I'm just doing it in my gray matter or in my brain. It's the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
Then you have to think, so your theory of, not yours, but the theory of scientific materialism doesn't explain those things. And it also can't explain paranormal experience. It can't explain precognition. It can't explain intuition. It can't explain psychic abilities that are legitimate. And I appreciate what you're saying about James or Andy and the rest, but that doesn't necessarily negate the authentic experiences that are out there. That just means there's a bunch of charlatans out there trying to make money. That's all that exposes.
Yeah, right, right.
And so, but here's science, here's scientific data that's saying that perhaps our brains are not the producers of consciousness, but they are the facilitators of consciousness while we're living in this material world.
Yeah. So in your thinking, is consciousness something that is being beamed into us or sort of streamed through us in a sort of maybe Kabbalistic fashion even, Yeah. Yeah. Is that how you perceive it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly that makes the most sense to me, having tried to give a fair hearing to all sides of the argument. And ironically, this was the belief of all of Western. This was the foundation of Western society.
Yeah,
idealism, the thought that consciousness and mind was all that was. That's why we had the Renaissance, and that's why we had a revival of it until really the middle of the 19th century. And the problem was that science, which does a great job of explaining this material world that we live in, right? If you could say, okay, there is a material world that we live in and science does a great job of explaining it, that's totally different than saying this material world that science can explain is all there is.
Yeah.
Very different things. But I mean, if you go back and look at it, science was, as it's blooming and blossoming, and even some of these other philosophies of enlightenment and the Renaissance, they had to fight with the church. The church was killing them. They're having inquisitions. Bruno was killed by the church, I think. And so there was a socio-political movement to say we need to, scientific materialism got started out of a socio-political necessity to do away with the church so that science could find its place.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the middle of the 19th century, it just began to take over.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I wonder, as with the micro, so with the macro, as above, so below, on earth as it is in heaven, if the development of society and consciousness, well, I don't really think there's any denying it. I think it's just pretty much obvious. However, maybe get your thoughts on it, that we almost mirror the development of the individual, like the person, you know what I mean? That I think that the age of scientific materialism is in some way our sort of rebellious youth, maybe our sort of, our young adulthood, where we're experimenting with new ideas and sort of jettisoning the ideas that were handed to us by our parents. And, we as children didn't understand maybe even perhaps how nuanced their beliefs were to them. because we only knew how to interpret things literally. And so then we rebel and we experiment with other things and we toss them overboard. And I think this age of scientific materialism that we are still in a lot of ways is sort of that, that it is sort of that. It's before the Ricorian second naivete. I don't think we've quite hit that yet corporately, where you don't get rid of, because that's what Ricord, he talked about the masters of suspicion, Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche. I think probably Darwin could be included in that as well. There's probably some other names now who could have been included, but his three were Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche. And he called them the masters of suspicion. And they sort of exposed religion for what it was on different levels, and they all had their own thing that they brought to the table. And Ricord's thing was that, but you have to take that and you have to incorporate it into what you become. You don't stay there. Suspicion is not something that you can remain in a state of healthily. You have to do what he called arrive at a second naivete. So the first naivete you have as a child, you can't help but have, because you're nothing but naive, right? You only know how to believe what's given to you and what's told you. And that's it. And you're certain in your naivete until something shakes you out of it. And then once you're shaken out of it, you're now at least open to the possibility that you can be wrong, right? Because you've been shaken out of one state of wrongness now into what you believe to be rightness, but now the seed is planted in you that you could be wrong again. And so you adopt this new belief system. And then at some point, and I don't know how it happened for you, but for me, and I know we were a little different in the paths we took. We both had the same kind of deconstruction experience, but for different reasons, and then took different paths, but kind of, I think, arrived at a similar place. But for me, there started to be a softening to some of the things that I hurled rocks at for a season, where I started to realize the utility of these things. Like anything that I think any sort of religion that one interprets literally is going to lead to terrible, terrible things.
Yeah.
The idea of hell, eternal conscious torment, I think is one of the most abusive and disgusting doctrine that's ever been developed.
Yeah.
However, the concept of hell as a metaphor is actually quite useful.
Right.
If you understand it as a metaphor, if you understand it as a symbol for what you can terraform your life into if you live a certain way, you can create this for yourself, or you can create that for yourself. And maybe that's really all of our ancestors were trying to say, because none of them had really pierced through the membrane and come back. And I mean, maybe they did through near-death experiences or something like that. But I mean, still, even what they experienced on that other side could have been a result of what they knew to be true in life, that you can create a hell for yourself, or you can create a heaven for yourself, whatever. Like, they're metaphors that work beautifully as metaphors, but the moment you literalize them, well, you've created another kind of hell. And so there started to be a softening in my own heart to these ideas. I started to see that these were actually quite useful. And I also started to see that I was trying to force myself to speak and think in a language that was not really native to me.
Yeah.
And so it just wasn't working. I actually found that even when I was still, let's say, mostly atheistic, I began to find myself being able to think better in Christian terms and in religious terms than in these new terms that had been given to me by my new religion and orthodoxy, because this was native to me. It was native to me. And so when I kind of came back to a kind of spirituality, or something that I call something like faith, I return to that language. And I mean very different things when I use that language now. I don't in any way, shape, or form mean what I once meant.
Right.
But I use it and it works. And, I have to be very careful that people don't think I'm talking about something I'm not talking about, because I don't want to give the impression that I do believe in whatever the way that I once did. But I don't know. But anyways, it's a long way of saying, coming into the second naivete, you bring with you all of the suspicions of that other season. You
Mm-hmm.
bring it with you. And one of the things you bring with you is the possibility that you could be wrong, because you've now been shown at least twice you can be wrong.
Right.
And so it really cracks your soul open to the concept of happening, of something happening to you that is beyond you, of the ability of your mind to expand and see something it couldn't see before. And I could be just as in the dark right now as I was when I was a child and thought I knew everything. I could, and in fact, I'm sure I am on an infinite number of levels. And so you bring that with you, but you can't, but you have to. Anyways, long way of saying, I feel like we are at one of those points in history right now where we may be about to cross a threshold of
Mm-hmm.
maturity from the age of scientific materialism, where that was the rule of the day, because
Mm-hmm.
that was the sort of pubescent stage we were in, where we knew everything. I mean, look at us. We are primates who we know how to strike the match that ignites suns. I mean, look at what we do. Look at who we are. We've done this all through science. Um, but I think we're coming to a point where, and I don't know what the occurrence will be, but I mean, look at the nuttiness of the world we live in. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
we have Senate hearings on the existence of UFOs now. I mean,
Yeah.
the people who were the fringiest of the fringe
Mm-hmm.
are now testifying respectably,
Mm-hmm.
and people are having respectable conversations about this stuff over tea,
Mm-hmm.
and you're really kind of the crazy one now if you don't believe that. And in my day job, I talk to some people about that, and it's funny because the younger ones are all like, "Oh yeah, there's aliens." Are you kidding me? Of course there's aliens. And then the older ones who kind of come from the older generation are still a little bit like, "Oh yeah, little green men" kind of thing. And it's like, but you can see where the shift is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the younger generation has all of the suspicions that they got from the age of scientific materialism, but they've also been cracked open to a kind of sense of wonder at the universe being larger than they thought it was. And it's in the philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead that the universe abhors sameness and habit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It just seems to be that. It seems to be a novelty generating machine of some sort, or
Mm-hmm.
the work of some novelty loving being or something, some consciousness that is all about creating novelty.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that novelty happens is through the introduction of chaos.
Right.
And I mentioned this a little bit in our message today. And so like
Mm-hmm.
in the opening chapters of Genesis, where creation happens, before anything occurs, what is there? There's chaos. There are chaotic waters. And this comes from the Mesopotamian story of creation. It's borrowed from the Enuma Elish, the Tehom, which is the philological equivalent of the saltwater, primordial saltwater dragon Tiamat, which is present in the Hebrew Bible as Tehom. And you have God in the midst of this chaos speaking words that begin to cause this chaos to come together in something, let's just say, less chaotic. But chaos was the foundation of creation. We say creation ex nihilo, but it really wasn't. It was creation from chaos. There was chaos. There was complexity.
Yeah.
And then that chaos and complexity came together in something that we could look at and understand as being orderly. But there had to be the chaos first. And that gives rise to all kinds of theories about why the chaos was there. I don't really think the biblical writers were too concerned with that. They understood principle that chaos precedes creation. And so I even look at just the chaos of the last decade, right? I mean, the last decade has been, I almost dropped the F-bomb here, but it's been friggin' chaotic. It's been from 2016 onward have been the most chaotic years that I've ever seen in my life. Even more chaotic than post 9/11 years, just because of the ability for the chaos to spread and multiply itself through social media. And I don't know, so it's like chaos. The more that there is, the more potential there is, or the more complexity there is. And then the more complexity there is, the more potential there is for something new and novel to emerge and to come forth. So it's like the the typewriter, the monkey typewriter theorem, right? If you give if you give a room full of monkeys typewriters and just give them an infinite amount of time to just bang on the keys, eventually they'll reproduce the works of William Shakespeare. Well, that's
Right.
because there's a lot of complexity there. However, if you put one monkey in a room with a ream of paper and a deconstructed typewriter, you increase the amount of time it's going to take for him to accidentally type out the words of William Shakespeare. You add more complexity, more monkeys, more typewriters, you increase the chance of novelty coming forward. Now you increase the complexity of the chaos by giving them laptops with predictive text and AI technology, and you increase the amount of monkeys. Now you've shortened the time frame in which in novelty is going to emerge. And so the more chaos there is and the more complex material there is that's present, the more potential there is for something new to spring forth that we've never seen or experienced before. And I feel like these last several years, the amount of monkeys and typewriters have increased exponentially. And I just use those as metaphors for like the amount of complexity. There's just a lot more going on in terms of the conversation. I think even things like disclosure and the talks about this is the increasing. It's chaos, but it's complexity. It's giving us, the universe, God, more to work with. And so I think we're really about to see God. I can talk for friggin' ever. I'm sorry. I really can. I can really prattle on and on and on about one thing, trying to get these ideas out. But there is more chaotic material to work with right now than I think there's ever been in my lifetime.
Yeah, I think there have been studies that have been done. I can't cite them because I can't remember them off the top of my head. But there have been studies that have been done that show that this time period that we're in, we're dealing with change at a higher rate and a faster rate than at any other time in any other stage of human development. I remember 20 years ago, Leonard Sweet, who was, kind of a church growth philosopher, it said that, there was more information in one edition of the New York Times, this is in the 1990s, than a person that lived a century ago would process in their entire lives. And with the internet and social media and all that stuff, that's increased exponentially. And financially, the changes, the climate change, all this stuff. So we really are. It's kind of funny, Jeff, because back in our day when we were immersed in Christianity, there was all this prophecy about the end of an age and something new coming and all this stuff. And I almost think intuitively that they're onto something.
I think you're 100% right. And I think I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. Please go.
I think we're all being pulled towards some kind of singularity, and before the singularity, there's chaos, right? There's chaos. Everything's out here floating chaotically, and then everything's drawn together, right? And it's like, oh, there's everything, but it comes together for one reason, and that's to spread outward again and to create something new. And it's like at this point, the chaos is such that there has to be a coming together.
Yeah.
And
I think here's, I interrupted you. Sorry.
Please interrupt me.
I think here's the human problem that I see. And I think if you look at the Bible from an esoteric perspective, I think this is brilliantly shown in the first 5 books of the Bible. I'll give you a couple instances of it. But I think the human tendency is it's so overwhelming, right? Like that chaos. And if we can embrace that, then we can say, okay, now change is possible. Change is not possible without chaos. I remember I read the works of, I can't remember the guy's name. I'm having a hard time with names tonight, Jeff.
I feel you, man. I get you.
But anyway, it was a.
Let's call him Dave.
Yeah, Dave. Dave was writing, but he was following on after William James and Proverbs of Hell, and he had written a work in a similar fashion called the Diabolicon, and he talked about how without rebellion, there could be no change because the system would just continue as is, right? Yeah. And that really spoke to me. And I see parallels between what you're talking about because without chaos, change isn't possible because we just get stuck in a pattern or a habit or whatever But embracing that chaos as a human being means embracing deconstruction, right?
Yeah.
So in Genesis 1 there, when it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. In the Hebrew, it's tohu vavohu
Mm-hmm.
is the Hebrew phrase. Well, that's the same phrase. The only other place that's used in the Pentateuch is when the Israelites leave Egypt and they go out into the wilderness. It says the wilderness was a place that was tohu vabohu.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's using that same kind of chaos. When God called Abraham, he said, get out. What did he tell him? He says, leave where you're living, leave your father's house, leave your country, leave your family, and go to a place that I will show you. Well, there's no certainty in what I will show you, but there's certainty in my father's house and in my country and my land and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think it's showing us this process that you're describing perfectly and brilliantly, that in order for us to mature, in order for us to evolve, in order for us to get to the next level, however you want to understand that, there has to be this deconstruction. There has to be this embracing of a place of tohu vabohu, this place of getting away from everything that's familiar, and we don't know what's coming. And so we see in the Bible, what do we see? Abraham takes Lot with him, and that causes him trouble. The Israelites start thinking, oh man, we had it so much better back in Egypt. And I think we're seeing a lot of that today. I think we're seeing so much change thrust upon people, so much chaos thrust upon people corporately, globally, and people are freaking out and don't know what to do with that. And it's hard to leave where you've been and go to a place that you'll be shown later, right? So we cling to what was. And I think that explains some of the vitriol and some of the strife and division and things that are out there, because we are at a stage in humanity where we are being forced to embrace chaos, and chaos is being thrust upon us. And it's our natural human tendency to say, no, let's go back to Egypt. Let's go. I mean, I don't know about you, but there were times in this process that was just like, man, I wish I could just go back to preaching on Sunday mornings.
Oh God. You have no idea how many times I said to my wife, I really wish I would have taken the blue pill. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like, I'll eat steak made out of ones and zeros, like the one guy who goes back in the Matrix. It's like, there were times when I'm like, there's like a negative balance in my checking account. I feel like a failure. I miss doing the thing that I love. I have all this existential dread and angst, and it's like, good God, what I wouldn't do to have it be my biggest problem that I got to come up with a sermon for Wednesday night right now, because I could pull that out of my back pocket in an instant. You know what I mean? Like the times I've been just like, oh God, what I wouldn't do. Or even just like the searching for like, maybe there's a way I can do that the way I do things now, and I can force, this new wine into that old wineskin. And I realize there really just isn't, at least not that I found right now. And maybe part of this chaos will be the novelty of new forms of doing what we once did will emerge. Maybe the maybe the creation of the new wine will necessitate the creation of new vessels, and they'll find their way to us or us to them. I don't know, but dude, absolutely. I've longed for the leeks and garlic of Egypt more nights than I care to recount, man, because there was certainty, there was security, at the very least. Well, it's like the Egyptians. We were slaves, but at least we weren't out here with our asses roasting in the desert sun. You know what I mean? And it's like there's the call forward into adventure of coming into something new, but it's going to take you 40 goddamn years to get there, And it's like, but is it worth it? I mean, yeah, that's the point. It is going to be worth it, but you can look over your shoulder and go back to Egypt. And I think for me, even like atheism was kind of something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I really do think it was. There's a call out of my father's household, in some ways, literally and metaphorically. Yep. And but then this is kind of an easy, off ramp that kind of gives me the same stuff, but it lets me kind of chill and rest rather than moving forward into complexity and into chaos. Mm-hmm. And the thing about the complex and the chaotic is it's much harder to explain. Like if somebody asks me about my spiritual life now and my beliefs, it's very hard for me to describe it. I found a meme I shared last year just the other day. It was in my Facebook memories where it was like, why are you always so vague when describing your spiritual beliefs? And then it's like my spiritual beliefs, and it's the pyramids and aliens and Sasquatch and Jesus. And it's like, it's like, yeah, that's kind of what it's like up here, man. I don't know. And it's like, that's kind of what's going on in here these days. There's a lot. It's hard to really explain that and put that down on paper. But I think the more it develops and the more you lean into it, the more it will come together in something that resembles order. But yeah,
I think that's the lesson in the scriptures, right? Like if because I'm with you, I think once we go into a literal interpretation, we miss the point. But I also don't think that ancient people were just idiots either, and I think there's some ancient wisdom embedded in the scriptures. And I think
nothing bothers me more than when people talk about the biblical writers as though they were just Bronze Age troglodytic knuckle dragging buffoons. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
And I did it too, so I can sympathize. But
but if there's any ancient wisdom there, if there's anything we can look to help guide our path through this, I think the lesson there is you can't go back. They couldn't go back to Egypt. It wasn't like it was a legitimate option. Hey, Moses, let's go back. It's like, no, we ain't going back. You know?
Like they're going to welcome you back anyways. Right?
Exactly.
Like, you can't go back to Eden. There's an angel with a flaming sword. You can't go back. You can't go back to Egypt because there's a pharaoh with a literal. I mean, you can't go back. You can't.
You can't go back to Judaism because Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, right?
Exactly.
And so that seems to be the repeating pattern. And so what I think the pattern is that it's natural. It's in our human nature to say, I could resonate. I was laughing so hard because I could resonate with everything you were saying, everything, every word of it, every word, Jeff. And so there's a natural tendency in us to want to go back. And so I think the wisdom that's there, or the answer is there, is you can't go back. So you have to embrace the complexity. You have to embrace the chaos, but also understand this complexity and chaos is not permanent. It's just the transitional phase between what was and what will be. And what will be novel.
Yes.
It will be something you haven't seen before. It will be something you haven't recognized before. And the only pathway forward, the only pathway for you is the pathway forward.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to resolve that within ourselves to say, okay, I can't I can't take the blue pill now. I can't go back.
Yeah. And even if you could, you would always know you did. So you can't truly undo it.
Right. And so the challenge is to say, okay, this is a crazy place we find ourselves in. This is a crazy time. This is a scary time.
Yeah.
This is an uncertain time. But all I can do as an individual is plow forward and move ahead and keep my eyes open for that novelty that's going to emerge. That's the new creation, the new heavens, the new earth, if you want to, that emerges out of the chaos.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think too, part of the complexity is the fact that you're carrying with you knowledge, you're carrying with you suspicion, you're carrying with you the understanding that you could be wrong. So that adds complexity. Just knowing that you can be wrong by having gone through an experience of deconstruction or faith crisis or whatever you want to call it. Or maybe it's not even in those terms. Maybe it's just that you were a strict scientific materialist and you have an experience you can't explain. Maybe it has nothing to do with religious conversion, but just something where you're like, holy crap, I don't know how to explain that one, But now you're bringing into this new phase of life suspicion. That's complexity, right? And so that gives rise, that creates the potential for you to, I think, really be a mystic, and I really think the mystic, was it Carl Rahner who said in the days to come, you'll either be person will either be a mystic or he'll be nothing at all. And I love Chesterton's explanation of the mystical, which is that the mystic has one foot on the earth and another foot in fairyland, and he's able to perfectly reconcile the two with no issues whatsoever. And he does have a presupposition, right? And his presupposition is there is something greater than just matter. Matter isn't just matter. And so it's kind of like you have a presupposition no matter which path you take.
You do.
You're always going to presuppose something. And if you don't presuppose one thing, I don't really think you can explain anything. Right. Presupposition is what allows you to explain anything. So it's like, if I'm going to presuppose anything, I'm going to presuppose wonder. I'm going to presuppose a universe that is far bigger, far more complex, far more beautiful than I could ever have imagined, as opposed to presupposing the reductionist idea that everything is just a, you know, you're just a brain in a meat suit and whatever, and this is all there is. Anyways, go ahead.
I'll tell you where I got with it, Jeff. I had to finally quit searching for absolute truth because everything I looked at was built on a presupposition.
Absolutely.
And so I had to embrace uncertainty and say, what's going to serve me best? You know, I'm uniquely wired, you're uniquely wired. So I knew atheism is not going to serve me as a belief system. So it's one of the things I love about, you know, the stuff I've been looking at with idealism and scientific materialism, to bring it full circle, is I can find something where I can be intellectually honest and authentic. And at the same time say, okay, I also know I'm choosing this because this is going to better serve me in my life as far as adding meaning and enrichment to my life, as opposed to other alternatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even the whole larger conversation can be a metaphor for the individual life experience, just as we're kind of coming to a close here on the show. And the individual life experience can be a metaphor for what's happening in the larger culture. And I really do see us as corporate humanity maturing and coming into a place where we're not going to leave behind the suspicions that emerged in the era of where scientific materialism ruled. We'll carry those suspicions into this next phase with us. And what it will contribute is, well, Mary Louise von Franz, the intellectual heiress of Jung, Carl Jung, said it's one thing to be a naive idealist. It's one thing to be a cynical realist, but it's another thing entirely to have no more delusions and to still hold the inner flame, you know?
I love that.
And to me, that's it. I mean, to me, that's just it. It's like this era of development smashed our childhood delusions. Okay, we don't have those anymore. We've come past that, but we can't stay there either. There's an inner flame that I will hold to because I've been touched by something that's beyond my ability to find, and I've touched things that it's happened. I can't. It's seared my soul. It's on me like a divine homing beacon. Now it's just I can't get rid of it. You know. And I carry into this new world and this new reality those previous suspicions, but it only makes novelty more possible because I'm open to the possibility of being wrong. I'm open to the possibility that there's more than what I know, and so it gives me it affords me the ability to not get stuck this time around the way I was stuck the last time around, because I know how wrong that I can be. Man,
travel companion you don't want to leave without.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've come about to the end of our time, regrettably, because I've been really enjoying this conversation, and I could definitely keep going, man. Man, I just so love these conversations we have, Aaron. They stay with me for a long time and leave me thinking. And I so appreciate you. So appreciate you being here tonight. And I hope this was meaningful to those of you who are watching. Aaron, anything you want to say just before we go off here?
No, thank you for having me. I always enjoy it. I'm incredibly enriched, and appreciate your viewers for tuning in.
Yeah. Everybody, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Have a great week. We love you. Peace. And also, class is dismissed.